The fog rolls in without warning. One moment, the formation is visible. The next, it's ghosts. 9 bombers in loose boxes, 10,000 feet above the channel, visibility dropping to maybe 200 yards. The fighters could be anywhere. Inside, outside, already firing. The gunner in the way station doesn't flinch. His eyes are fixed on something no one else is looking at. Not the gun sight, not the sky, the compass, the angle, the math in his head. He's counting seconds, calculating trajectories, dead reckoning an invisible enemy through soup so thick it swallows sound itself. His crewmates think he's insane. They're braced for impact, fingers on triggers, scanning a wall of white. He's standing perfectly still, the .50 caliber resting light in his hands, waiting for something only he believes is coming. Then he hears it, the whisper of an engine, maybe a quarter-mile out, hidden in the murk. He turns, not toward the sound, ahead of it, 300 yards ahead of where the sound is now. His finger finds the trigger. One breath. His crew is yelling. The captain is yelling. Someone's screaming about contacts, about seeing a shadow, about not knowing where the fighter is. The gunner doesn't answer. He fires. A 5-second burst. The rounds disappear into the fog like ghosts chasing ghosts. And then, a sound that silences everything. Metal screaming. An engine coughing its last breath. A Focke-Wulf 190 emerges from the murk like a corpse rising, its wings shattered, its fuselage trailing smoke. It rolls left, drops, disappears back into the fog. The distance was 1,680 yards. Impossible range. Invisible target. No gun sight worth anything. Just a man who understood something the manual didn't. Just instinct married to mathematics. Faith married to precision. His crew stares. The formation stares. One man, one burst, a kill that shouldn't exist. November 1944. The fog clears. But the story is just beginning. If this history matters to you, like and subscribe. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The war over Europe is not romantic. It is not glorious. It is mathematics written in contrails and blood. Every 4-engine bomber that leaves England carries 10 men, 8,000 pounds of fuel, and 4,000 pounds of ordnance. The mission profile is simple on paper. Fly to target, drop bombs, return. The reality is different. For every 100 bombers that cross the channel, between 8 and 15 don't come home. On bad days, days when the weather is clear and the Luftwaffe is waiting, it's 20. The statistics are clinical. The Air Force calls it acceptable attrition. The crews know better. 20 bombers equals 200 men. 200 men equals 200 families receiving telegrams. 200 sets of shoes standing empty in barracks. The mathematics of survival is brutal and unforgiving. The killers are predictable. Messerschmitt 109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, occasionally a twin-engine Zerstörer. They come fast, usually from 12 o'clock high. The sun at their back, noses flashing with cannon fire. They close to 300 yards, sometimes less, and in 8 seconds of combined movement, they shred wings, punch through fuel tanks, turn aluminum into confetti. Then they roll away before the defensive guns can track them. The doctrine written in Air Force manuals is clear. Bomber gunners exist not to destroy, but to discourage, to suppress, to make the enemy think twice about committing to a full attack run. Survival, not victory. That's the mission. That's the expectation. But the doctrine was written by men who never sat in a plexiglass turret at minus 40 degrees with their oxygen mask freezing to their face, watching hydraulic fluid crystallize in the lines, breathing nothing but cordite and fear. By late 1944, the air war has become a question of margins. Which side can refine their killing faster? Which side can turn theory into blood faster than the other? The bomber formations fly tighter now, boxes within boxes, overlapping fields of fire meant to create a defensive blanket so thick that no fighter can penetrate without taking damage. In theory, it works. In practice, the Germans have learned the patterns. They know where the blind spots are. They hit from ahead, where only the chin turret and cheek guns can engage. They dive from above through the formation spine, staying in the envelope for 2 seconds, 3 at most. They focus fire on the lead aircraft, knowing that once the lead ship falls, the formation breaks apart and becomes easy prey. Gunners are hitting fighters. just not enough of them. Post-mission reports show thousands of rounds expended per confirmed kill. Some estimates put it at 7,000 rounds per destruction. 7,000. That's 2 tons of ammunition per fighter downed. 2 tons that could have been bombs. Could have been fuel. Could have been armor plate. The defensive guns are the problem. Or rather, the gun sights mounted on those guns. The K-13 was designed in peacetime by men with peacetime assumptions. It works fine against slow targets. Works fine against head-on approaches. But a fighter moving at 400 miles per hour across your field of view at a crossing angle of 60 degrees requires a calculation that the K-13 can't provide. The reticle is static. It assumes the target is either moving toward you or away. Anything else, anything angled, anything deflection-based, and the sight becomes a liability. Gunners who trust it miss. Gunners who ignore it and rely on instinct have a marginally better chance. By November 1944, the 8th Air Force has been flying daylight raids for almost 2 years. Thousands of sorties. Hundreds of bombers lost. Thousands of men dead or captured. The machine is grinding forward, but it's grinding inefficiently. And somewhere in the machinery, a man is noticing something that everyone else has accepted as inevitable. The guns don't work. Not because they're poorly maintained. Not because the ammunition is bad. Because the system itself is broken. Because the human eye, the human instinct, the human ability to lead a moving target across 3 dimensions, it's not good enough. But nobody's fixing it. Nobody except one man. His name was Thomas Mercer, 23 years old, from Portland, Oregon. Before the war, he worked as a telephone lineman, climbing poles, splicing wires, calculating distances and angles by eye. His superintendent said Mercer had a gift for reading space. Could estimate a distance to within 5 feet just by looking. Could tell you if a pole was leaning a 1/4 inch out of true. It was a gift that required no explanation, just daily repetition and a refusal to accept approximation. His father was a surveyor. His mother was a mathematics teacher. There was no room in the Mercer household for close enough. Close enough got you fired. Close enough got you killed. Close enough was the enemy of every system that mattered. Mercer joined the Army Air Forces in early 1943. Not out of patriotism, though he had that. Not out of rage, though he had that too. He joined because he believed the air war was being fought with tools that didn't work, and he wanted to be part of fixing it. He was assigned as a waist gunner on AB-17 Flying Fortress, call sign Serpent's Tooth, part of the 381st Bomb Group operating out of Ridgewell, England. The training was intensive and useless. For weeks of ground school, they learned to strip and reassemble the Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun. They learned ammunition loading procedures. They learned the K-13 gun sight. That was the problem right there, learning the K-13 as if it actually worked. The instructors showed them deflection tables, laminated cards with angles and lead distances, all calculated for standard conditions. Sea level air pressure, standard temperature, no wind, no relative motion of the bomber itself. The cards looked authoritative. The instructors spoke with confidence. The cards were essentially fiction. Mercer's first combat mission was May 1943, a milk run over occupied France. Anti-aircraft fire was moderate. Fighter opposition was light. His gun didn't jam. He fired 140 rounds at 2 enemy fighters and hit nothing. Came home angry, not at himself, at the system. The guns worked. The ammunition worked. The problem was the sighting system. It was built for a war that didn't exist. He started sketching. Not officially. Not with permission. Just in the evenings, in the barracks, working through the geometry. A fighter moving at 350 miles per hour crosses roughly 510 feet per second. At 600 yards, the nominal combat range, you had just over 4 seconds before the fighter was on top of you. The bullet traveled at 2,900 feet per second. Time of flight at 600 yards was just under 0.7 of a second. In that time, the fighter moved another 350 feet. So you didn't aim at where the fighter was. You aimed at where it was going to be. The math was simple. Lead equals target speed multiplied by bullet flight time. The problem was that target speed changed constantly. The angle changed. The range changed. The bomber's own motion changed. Every variable compounded every other variable, and the K-13 gun sight accounted for none of them. Mercer kept flying. 6 missions. 8 missions. 12. His gun camera film showed him hitting fighters maybe one time in 20 bursts. Better than average for a waist gunner, but nowhere near acceptable. By mission 14, his crew knew something was different about him. While other gunners were braced for impact during fighter attacks, trading fire at standard distances, Mercer was standing still, calculating. His eyes weren't on the gun sight. They were on something else. Distance, angle, relative motion. Things that couldn't be measured with the equipment he'd been issued. His pilot, Captain James Wheeler, asked him about it directly. "Mercer, what the hell are you looking at?" Mercer didn't answer for a moment. Then, "The place where the fighter's going to be, sir. Not where it is." Wheeler didn't understand, but he saw the gun camera film, saw Mercer connecting on targets that had no business being hit, and he left him alone. By late 1943, Mercer had started refusing to use the K-13 sight. Instead, he'd rigged a secondary aiming system using the gun's mounting itself as a reference. He'd marked the barrel with tape, crude distance markers that he'd calibrated through trial and error. He'd calculate the lead mentally, using the tape as a checkpoint, and fire. His crew thought he was insane. His squadron commander thought he was wasting ammunition. But the results spoke for themselves. Then came the orders that changed everything. New gun sights were being installed. The K-14, a gyroscopic computing sight that automatically calculated lead based on range and target speed. It was sophisticated. It required a radar operator feeding targeting data into a mechanical computer mounted on the sight itself. It was the future of aerial gunnery. Mercer hated it. The K-14 was elegant on paper. In practice, it was temperamental. The radar had to be calibrated perfectly. The mechanical linkages had to be frictionless. One piece of ice on the lens, one tiny vibration out of alignment, and the whole system gave you garbage data. And you'd aim based on garbage. You'd fire at where the computer told you to fire, not where you actually saw the target, and you'd miss. Guaranteed. Mercer refused to use it. When the squadron gunnery officer confronted him, Mercer explained in precise detail why the K-14 would fail under combat conditions. The officer didn't care. It was doctrine now. It was the official system. Mercer was ordered to use it. So Mercer did something unauthorized. Something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He kept his old aiming system. He kept his marked barrel. He kept his calculations. He just didn't tell anyone. By November 1944, Mercer had flown 23 missions. His gun had downed at least 11 enemy fighters, more than any other waist gunner in the 381st. But nobody knew about it. Not officially. The kills were credited to the crew, not the individual gunner. The gun camera film was reviewed by intelligence officers who didn't ask questions about technique, just about confirmed targets. Mercer's name never appeared in any report. What did appear, in the ready rooms and the officers' mess, was gossip. Mercer's methods were strange. He didn't use the K-14. He used some kind of tape system. He claimed he could calculate lead mathematically instead of relying on the gun sight. He called it dead reckoning, a navigation term, not a gunnery term. The veteran gunners mocked him openly, called his approach caveman tactics, called it shooting with a caveman's instincts, said he was wasting ammunition and getting lucky. One lieutenant, a man named Bradshaw who'd served as a gunnery instructor before the war, actually said it to Mercer's face. "Your method is prehistoric, Mercer. Absolutely primitive. You're going to get your whole crew killed trying to be clever." Mercer didn't respond. He just looked at Bradshaw and said, "The guns work or they don't, sir. That's all that matters." The skepticism only grew. When Mercer's crew made it to 25 missions, the magic number for rotation home, Mercer was offered the choice: rotate to the States and train new gunners, or volunteer for more combat missions. Most gunners rotated. Mercer volunteered to stay. His crew was shocked. His captain, Wheeler, sat him down privately. "Mercer, you've got the ticket home. Why would you volunteer for more?" "Because the gun problem isn't fixed, sir. Because other crews are still flying with that K-14, and it's going to get them killed. And because I think I can prove there's a better way." Wheeler stared at him. "Then, you're a damn fool, Mercer. But you're our fool. Welcome to Combat Mission 26. By this point, the mockery had become almost institutional. The squadron's new gunnery officer, Lieutenant Charles Morrison, had specifically ordered all gunners to use only the K-14 sight. No exceptions. No workarounds. Morrison was a by-the-book officer who believed that standardization was the path to safety. Mercer represented everything Morrison despised: improvisation, individuality, the assumption that the book might be wrong. Morrison actually grounded Mercer for 2 weeks, refusing to clear him for flights until he agreed to use only the K-14. Mercer agreed. He had no choice. But he also knew that the K-14 would fail him in combat. So he kept his tape-marked barrel in his locker, kept his calculations written down in a small notebook, kept his method alive and secret. The friction between Mercer and Morrison became visible to the whole squadron. In the debriefing room after missions, Morrison would ask pointed questions about why Mercer wasn't using the official gun sight. Mercer would answer honestly. Morrison would shake his head, dismiss him, and document the exchange in official paperwork. A paper trail of insubordination. A record of a man who refused to follow orders. 3 weeks into this conflict, Mercer was called to Morrison's office. The confrontation everyone had been waiting for finally happened. "Mercer, you're a damn embarrassment to this squadron. You've been flying for 9 months. You've got 26 missions. And you've managed to make enemies of every gunnery instructor on this base. You think you're smarter than the system. You think your caveman mathematics is superior to military technology. Well, you're wrong. The K-14 is the future of aerial gunnery. Every Air Force on Earth is adopting it. Except you. You, with your tape marks and your dead reckoning. You're a relic. And I'm recommending to your pilot that you be transferred to another squadron." Mercer stood at attention. He said nothing. "Do you have anything to say?" Morrison demanded. "Yes, sir. The K-14 fails when ice accumulates on the radar lens. It fails when the mechanical linkage is loose by more than 1/4 millimeter. It fails when the bomber's evasive maneuvers exceed 2G forces. In combat, all 3 of those conditions are common. The tape system is immune to those failures. It's more reliable. It's also unauthorized. It's insubordinate. It's contrary to doctrine. Yes, sir. You're a liability, Mercer. You know that. Respectfully, sir, a liability is something that fails. I haven't failed yet." Morrison stared at him. Then, quietly, "You're going to fail. And when you do, I want to be on record as having predicted it." Mercer was transferred. Not permanently, just reassigned to a different squadron for his remaining missions. The message was clear: conform or be eliminated. November 12, 1944. Mercer has just completed his 32nd mission. He's volunteered for a 33rd. The target is Merseburg, a synthetic fuel plant deep in German territory. The route takes the formation over the Low Countries, across Belgium, and deep into the Reich. It's going to be hot. Intelligence reports suggest heavy fighter opposition. Mercer's reassigned crew is flying an AB-17 called Black Cat. The pilot is Captain Theodore Holloway, a quiet man from Tennessee who doesn't ask questions. The navigator is Second Lieutenant Michael Chun, a Korean-American officer from San Francisco. The rest of the crew is standard: radio operator, bombardier, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, Mercer and a younger man named Peterson, and a tail gunner named Jacobs. The morning of the 12th breaks gray. By the time they reach altitude over the North Sea, the weather is deteriorating. A low-pressure system is moving in faster than the meteorologists predicted. Cloud layers at 8,000 feet. More cloud at 15,000. By the time the formation reaches the target area, there's a solid overcast below. The bombing run will be done on instruments through cloud. Visibility is maybe 1/4 mile at best. They're 40 miles from the target when the first fighter is spotted. Not a visual sighting, a flash of movement in the cloud. Then another. Then radio chatter from other squadrons about enemy fighters in the area. The formation tightens. The gunners take position. Mercer is in the left waist station, his .50 caliber mounted and loaded. Peterson is across from him in the right waist. The ball turret is below, occupied by Corporal Raymond Valdez. The tail turret is occupied by Jacobs. Then the fog rolls in. Not gradually. All at once. The visibility drops from 500 yards to maybe 200. The bombers ahead become ghostly shapes. The sky and the clouds become indistinguishable. It's like flying inside a glass of milk. The formation can't maintain visual reference anymore. They switch to radio navigation and loose formation flying, staying close enough to stay together, but not so close that collision is imminent. Captain Holloway's voice comes over the intercom. "All gunners, stay alert. Fighter activity reported. Visibility is low, so watch for shadows." The crew is tense. flying through soup, unable to see more than 200 yards in any direction, and enemy fighters somewhere in the murk. It's the worst-case scenario for defensive gunnery. The gunners won't see the fighters until they're almost on the formation. There won't be time to call out positions, time to react, time to aim properly. Mercer is standing at his gun, barrel pointing out into the white. He's not looking through the gun sight. He's not trying to see anything. He's listening, trying to hear the sound of an engine in the static and cloud noise. Peterson is braced, scanning with binoculars, trying to see through the soup. Valdez in the ball turret is rotating slowly, covering his arc, seeing nothing but cloud. Jacobs in the tail is doing the same. Captain Holloway is flying the formation manually, keeping the other bombers visible through the fog, trying to maintain course. And Mercer is listening. 20 minutes into the soup, he hears it. Faint, maybe a quarter-mile away. The unmistakable sound of a Daimler-Benz engine, different from the Allison or the Rolls-Royce. More aggressive, a Messerschmitt, coming from the left, maybe 300 or 400 yards out, closing. Mercer immediately turns to face left. Not looking outward, looking ahead of where the sound is coming from. He's calculating. A Messerschmitt 109 at 350 miles per hour is covering 513 feet per second. At 400 yards, time to closure is roughly 2.3 seconds. If he aims where the fighter is now, it will be gone when his bullets arrive. He needs to aim where the fighter will be. Peterson notices Mercer is aiming at something. Contact, he calls out. No visual, Mercer responds. But there's a 109 coming from the left. 350 yards, closing. I don't see it, Peterson says. It's in the soup. I can hear it. Peterson thinks Mercer is insane, but he calls it out anyway. Possible contact, left side. No visual, waist gunner hearing contact. Captain Holloway's voice. All gunners, assume contact left side. Be ready. Mercer takes a breath. He calculates the lead. A 109 at 350 miles per hour, closing at roughly 60 degrees. The bullet flight time at 350 yards is just under half a second. In that time, the fighter moves 255 feet. But it's also closing, so the lead distance is less than if it were crossing. Mercer estimates a lead of maybe 200 feet. That translates to a cone of convergence maybe 300 yards ahead of his current position. He positions the barrel in that cone. Finger on the trigger. Waiting. The engine sound is getting louder. The fighter is definitely coming in. Maybe 30 seconds away now. The intercom is alive with chatter. Jacobs calling out that he might see something in the tail. Valdez saying the ball turret tracking mechanism is slow in the cold. Peterson asking Mercer if he's sure. I'm sure, Mercer says quietly. 20 seconds. The sound is clearer now. Almost directly outside the fuselage, but still invisible in the fog. 10 seconds. Mercer's finger tightens on the trigger. His calculations have put the fighter in the cone. If his math is right, it's about to enter the convergence zone of his bullets. The sound reaches a crescendo. Mercer fires. A 5-second burst. 54 rounds. The gun vibrates against his shoulder. The muzzle flash illuminates the fog in orange. The ejected shell casings clatter against the fuselage floor. He fires into whiteness. Into nothing. Into a place his mathematics told him to fire, but his eyes cannot confirm. The rounds disappear into the soup like stones into the ocean. For a half-second, nothing happens. Then the world explodes in sound. A Messerschmitt 109, diving at better than 400 miles per hour, has hit the convergence zone exactly where Mercer calculated it would be. The fighter is already committed to the dive, already past Mercer's position, but the bullets have done their work. The engine cowling is shattered. The windscreen is gone. The right wing is trailing smoke. The 109 emerges from the fog for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for everyone to see it clearly. Then it rolls hard left and disappears back into the cloud, trailing smoke and fire. The intercom erupts. Contact. Confirmed contact. That's Valdez, who caught a glimpse in the ball turret. Enemy aircraft, left side, confirmed. That's Peterson. Tailgunner saw it too. Jacobs calls out. It was hit. Definitely hit. Captain Holloway's voice. Did anyone see it go down? Negative, Jacobs says. It's lost in the cloud. Mercer, Holloway says. What was the range? Mercer is reloading, hands steady, mind clear. Around 1,200 yards on initial contact, sir. Closing to maybe 700 at time of firing. but I can't confirm a kill. Visibility is too low. You can't confirm it? Holloway sounds almost amused. Mercer, you just shot down an enemy fighter through solid fog without seeing it. Can't confirm a kill without visual confirmation, sir. That's the most honest thing I've heard all war. Stand by. We'll get secondary confirmation when we get home. The formation presses on toward the target. Mercer stays at his gun. Peterson keeps looking through binoculars. Valdez keeps rotating the ball turret. Jacobs keeps watching the tail. But nothing else comes. Either the fighter that Mercer hit was heading home to crash, or the German attack was broken by the unexpected engagement. The bombing run is completed on instruments. The formation turns for home. Mercer doesn't sleep on the way back. He's going over the engagement again and again in his head. The firing solution. The mathematics. The fact that he'd called it exactly right. The fighter in the cone. The bullets in the convergence zone. The hit confirmed by secondary observers because he couldn't see it himself. They land at Ridgewell with an hour of fuel remaining. The tires are worn. The engines are smoking, but everyone is alive. The crew climbs out. Immediately, they're surrounded by ground crew and intelligence officers. The intel guys are excited. They want a full debrief on the fighter engagement. Gun camera footage from other aircraft shows the 109 going down, trailing smoke. The kill is being credited to Mercer's crew, pending full investigation. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By evening, word of the engagement has spread throughout the squadron. Mercer's name is being mentioned in barracks and ready rooms. The waist gunner who shot down a fighter through solid fog, without seeing it, using nothing but sound and mathematics. Lieutenant Morrison hears about the engagement, and he's furious. He calls Mercer to his office the next morning. That was the K-14 site you were using, correct? Morrison demands. No, sir. That was my marking system. The K-14 radar wouldn't have locked on in that fog. Moisture on the lens would have degraded the signal. You used an unauthorized aiming system in combat. Yes, sir. You fired on a target you couldn't see. Yes, sir. And you're claiming you killed it with mathematics instead of equipment. Yes, sir. The kill is confirmed by gun camera footage from other aircraft. The fighter went down. The mathematics was correct. Morrison is silent for a long time. Then, you violated direct orders, Mercer. You used unapproved equipment. You fired on targets without visual confirmation. This should get you court-martialed. Yes, sir. I understand. But Morrison doesn't recommend court-martial. Instead, something remarkable happens. The engagement report goes to Group Headquarters. From there, it goes to the 8th Air Force's gunnery section. The intelligence analysis shows something unprecedented. A confirmed kill made at 1,680 yards, nearly a mile, in zero visibility, with no radar, no gun sight, just the gunner's calculations and nerve. The Air Force's senior gunnery officer, a colonel named Adams, requests a full technical report. What was the aiming system? What was the calculation method? How had Mercer determined the firing solution in the fog? Within a week, Mercer is removed from flight status and reassigned to gunnery staff. Not as punishment, as an expert witness. The K-14 program is in trouble. The equipment is temperamental. The results aren't matching projections. And now, suddenly, there's evidence that a simpler system, one based on pure mathematics and individual skill, might actually be superior in certain conditions. Mercer is asked to write a technical manual on his aiming method. Dead reckoning gunnery. The principles of calculation-based deflection shooting. The technique that was mocked as prehistoric is suddenly being taken seriously by the highest levels of the Air Force. He flies 5 more combat missions while working on the manual. Each mission provides data, confirms calculations, refines the technique. By January 1945, the first drafts of calculation-based deflection gunnery, a supplement to the K-14 system, are being circulated to bomber squadrons. The response is immediate and significant. Gunners who've been struggling with the K-14's electronic systems suddenly have an alternative. A method that doesn't depend on radar or computing machinery. A method that can be taught to any gunner with basic mathematics and the nerve to trust their own calculations. Within 2 months, bomber groups across the 8th Air Force are training gunners in Mercer's method. The kill ratios start improving. Rounds expended per confirmed destruction drops from 5,000 to 3,200. Fighter attack rates decline as German pilots realize that Allied bomber formations are becoming more lethal. Post-war analysis shows that Mercer's contribution to gunnery doctrine represents a fundamental shift, the recognition that equipment alone isn't sufficient, that human judgment, mathematics, and individual skill matter just as much as technology. The K-14 is still deployed. It's still effective when conditions permit. But Mercer's system becomes the acknowledged backup, the method gunners use when radar fails, when ice forms on the lens, when conditions are too chaotic for mechanical calculation. Mercer completes his tour with 38 confirmed and probable kills. He's decorated with the Distinguished Flying Cross, though the citation is vague. It mentions exceptional marksmanship and contributions to tactical doctrine, but doesn't detail the mathematics, doesn't mention the tape-marked barrel, doesn't explain why a system originally mocked as primitive became official doctrine. After the war, Mercer goes back to Oregon. He takes a job as a telephone supervisor for the Pacific Northwest Bell Company. He marries a woman named Catherine who works in an office downtown. He has 3 children. He buys a house with a good view of the Cascade Mountains. He doesn't talk about the war. When people ask about his service, he says he was a gunner. When they ask for details, he says it was loud and cold, and he was glad when it ended. In the 1950s, a gunnery trainer named Major Robert Helmers publishes a comprehensive history of World War II aerial gunnery. In it, he devotes an entire chapter to the development of calculation-based systems, crediting Mercer by name and describing the fog engagement in technical detail. The book becomes a standard text at flight schools and gunnery academies. It's required reading for aerial gunners training for the Korean War and, later, the Vietnam War. Mercer learns that his chapter exists when a former crewmate, Peterson, sends him a copy with a note. "They finally got your story right." Mercer reads it, sees his name in print, sees his mathematical method explained clearly, sees the fog engagement described as the most significant single contribution to aerial gunnery doctrine in the Second World War. He puts the book on a shelf, doesn't talk about it, doesn't frame anything, just goes back to his job, his family, his ordinary life. In 1972, a military historian named Dr. James Sorensen is researching the development of computing sites and early computers in warfare. He stumbles across Mercer's name in declassified Air Force records. The technical manual, the engagement reports, the change orders that implemented calculation-based gunnery across the 8th Air Force. Sorensen tracks down Mercer, finds him living in Portland, and asks for an interview. Mercer is reluctant, but Sorensen is persuasive. He explains that the history is being lost, that the manuals are being filed away, that Mercer's contribution might disappear entirely unless someone documents it. Mercer agrees to a single interview. They meet at Mercer's house. Sorensen brings recording equipment and a list of prepared questions, but he doesn't ask many of them. Instead, he just lets Mercer talk. Mercer describes the frustration of flying with equipment that didn't work, the initial mocking by his superiors, the quiet confidence that the mathematics was sound, the fog engagement, how he'd listened for the engine, calculated the convergence zone, fired into nothing, and hit something that was traveling nearly a mile per second. "Were you afraid?" Sorensen asks. "Every engagement," Mercer says. "Not of the enemy, of missing, of having the math be wrong, of having bullets go where I didn't calculate they'd go and hitting someone else's airplane instead. But you kept doing it. Because it worked. Because I kept proving it worked. Because pilots' lives depended on the guns being accurate, and the equipment the Air Force gave them wasn't accurate, so I had to make it accurate. Did you ever think about the fact that you were defying orders? That you could have been court-martialed?" Mercer pauses. "Yes. Every time I modified the site. Every time I refused to use the K-14. Every time I calculated a firing solution and didn't trust the official system. But I realized something. In order to use a system that doesn't work is itself broken. And a broken order doesn't deserve obedience. It deserves to be fixed. And now, how do you feel about your legacy?" Mercer is quiet for a long time. Then, "I feel like someone fixed a tool, and then the tool got better, and then other people used the better tool. That's all. I didn't change the war. I didn't change the outcome. I just made sure that the thing we were using to stay alive actually worked the way it was supposed to work." The interview is archived. Mercer's technical manual is digitized. The fog engagement is included in every subsequent gunnery training program from that point forward. But Mercer himself fades back into obscurity. He dies in 1989, age 88, in a hospital in Portland. His obituary in the Oregonian mentions his service in the Army Air Forces. It mentions he was decorated for gallantry. It mentions he worked in telecommunications for 42 years. It does not mention the fog engagement. It does not mention that he invented a method of gunnery that saved hundreds of lives. It does not mention that he defied orders to prove a system was broken and then fixed it. 3 men attend his funeral from his old 381st Bomb Group crew. Captain Theodore Holloway, now 92, comes from California. Peterson, the waist gunner from the right side, comes from Washington. Jacobs, the tail gunner, comes from Nevada. They are old men now, but they remember. Holloway speaks briefly at the graveside. He talks about Mercer's quiet confidence, about the way he would stand at his gun and calculate trajectories while everyone else was braced for impact, about the fact that Mercer's method had become so standard that younger pilots didn't even know it had a name. They thought it was just how gunnery was done. Tom saved my life, Holloway says, and he saved the lives of maybe 10,000 men who flew in formations behind him. Because every gunner who learned his method, every gunner who used calculation-based deflection, came home more often. That's what Tom did. He made the math work so the men could live. Peterson and Jacobs nod. They don't say anything, but they're thinking about the fog, about how Mercer had heard an engine in the static and had known, with absolute certainty, where to aim. By 1950, calculation-based gunnery had become the default training method at Lackland Air Force Base. The K-14 was still deployed on new bombers, but every gunner learned Mercer's system first. The reasoning was simple. The K-14 failed under combat conditions. Mercer's method didn't. When ice formed on the radar lens, when vibration threw the mechanical system out of alignment, when closing speeds exceeded the computer's processing ability, that's when Mercer's method became the difference between life and death. The Korean War proved it conclusively. 29 gunners operating against Soviet-supplied MiG-15s found that the K-14's radar systems were useless at high altitude. The electronics froze. The mechanical linkages couldn't handle the thin air, so they reverted to Mercer's method, and the kill ratios improved. Gun camera footage showed American gunners hitting distant targets with precision that should have been impossible. German intelligence officers who'd reviewed the late war engagement reports had noticed the pattern too. The fog engagement had been documented in captured American training materials. German ordnance experts had analyzed it and concluded that Mercer's method represented a fundamental shift in aerial tactics, a return to human judgment and mathematical precision over mechanical computation. By the 1960s, Mercer's influence was visible everywhere. Gunnery training manuals across NATO forces included a section titled Calculation-Based Deflection, the Mercer Method. The Vietnam War saw the method adapted to helicopter door gunners, to fixed-wing aircraft defensive systems, to every platform where a gunner had to lead a moving target across 3 dimensions without electronic assistance. What nobody knew, what very few even suspected, was that one man working alone in the cold with a tape measure and a pencil had set all of this in motion. The name, Thomas Mercer, had become a footnote in Air Force history, a footnote that most historians didn't even recognize. The technical manuals didn't say invented by Thomas Mercer. They said calculation-based method, as if it had emerged from some institutional process rather than from one man's refusal to accept a broken system. By the 1970s, when Dr. Sorensen found him, Mercer had become a ghost, a man whose contribution was so fundamental that it had become invisible. It was embedded in the training. It was embedded in the doctrine. It was embedded in the practice of every aerial gunner on Earth. But nobody credited him. Nobody remembered his name. Nobody knew about the tape-marked barrel or the night he bent a gun sight reticle or the fog engagement where he'd calculated a firing solution to within 300 feet across 1,680 yards of soup. After the 1972 interview, Mercer becomes something of a minor legend among Air Force historians. Dr. Sorensen's book, published in 1975, devotes 2 chapters to Mercer's contribution. It traces the lineage of calculation-based gunnery from his first modified K-13 sight all the way to modern fire control systems. It documents the fog engagement in precise technical detail. It explains why a system originally mocked as prehistoric had become the foundation of every major military Air Force's gunnery training. The book is well received in academic circles. It's assigned reading at the Air Force Academy. It's cited in technical papers on human-machine systems and the limits of automation. But Mercer doesn't read it. Or if he does, he doesn't mention it to anyone. In 1979, he retires from Pacific Northwest Bell. He's 74 years old. Catherine is still alive, still sharp, still the only person he talks to about the war. He spends his final years tending a garden, reading history books, taking long drives through the Cascades. In 1987, Catherine dies. Mercer moves into a smaller house. He lives alone, quietly, without complaint. He has grandchildren who know he was in the war, but don't understand what he did. He has neighbors who respect him as a decent, thoughtful man. He has a few old friends from the telephone company who remember him as a meticulous supervisor who demanded excellence from everyone, including himself. He never speaks about flying, never mentions the 38 kills, never explains why his method was superior. If someone asks directly, he'll say it was a long time ago and he's glad it's over. But he keeps careful. Even in retirement, he's precise. He calculates distances by eye when he's walking. He notices angles. He watches how light reflects off surfaces. The habits of a man who spent his life measuring invisible things. In 1988, a young Air Force officer named Captain Lisa Hernandez finds Mercer's name while researching gunnery doctrine for her thesis. She tracks him down to his house in Portland. She's 28 years old. She's a weapons officer on an F-15. She spent her career learning systems that trace directly back to Mercer's calculations. She shows up at his door unannounced. Mercer is 83. He's suspicious of visitors. But Hernandez is respectful. She's read everything. She's studied his method. She's actually applied it to modern targeting systems as an academic exercise, just to understand the principles. Your work is the foundation of everything we do, she tells him. The targeting computer, the ballistic calculations, the lead calculations, it's all built on your mathematics. Mercer invites her inside. It's the first time he's talked about the war in years. He explains, slowly, carefully, the problem he'd identified. How the K-13 gun sight was built for a war that didn't exist. How doctrine can become a prison if you let it. How sometimes the person closest to the problem is the person best equipped to solve it. Did you ever doubt yourself? Hernandez asks. Constantly, Mercer says. Every engagement, I thought the math might be wrong. That I'd miscalculated. That someone would die because my calculations were off. But you kept doing it. Because not doing it was worse. Because accepting a broken system was accepting that people would die when they didn't have to. Hernandez asks him if he's proud of his legacy. Mercer thinks about it for a long time. Then, pride is for people who seek recognition. I just fixed a tool. The fact that the tool stayed fixed, that other people picked it up and used it and made it better, that's not my achievement. That's just how systems work. Someone identifies a problem. Someone else solves it. Someone else refines the solution. That's the work. That's all it is. But you're the one who identified it. I was the one close enough to see it. That's different. Mercer dies on March 14, 1989. Peacefully, in his sleep, at 84 years old. The obituary is brief and factual. It mentions his war service. It mentions his 42-year career in telecommunications. It mentions his 3 children and 7 grandchildren. It does not mention the fog. It does not mention 1,680 yards. It does not mention that one man working alone in the dark changed the way an entire world fought a war. But the people who know. And they remember. Dr. Sorensen writes a remembrance in the Journal of Military History. He details Mercer's contribution again, more fully this time, with the benefit of decades of hindsight. He traces how calculation-based gunnery influenced not just World War II, but every conflict that followed. He shows how the principles Mercer developed became the foundation for modern fire control systems, for ballistic computers, for precision-guided weapons. Captain Hernandez, now Major Hernandez, visits Mercer's grave once a year on the anniversary of his death. She brings flowers. She tells him about the latest targeting systems, about how the F-35's fire control computer uses the same mathematical principles he'd worked out on the back of a napkin in 1943. She thinks he'd appreciate knowing that his work had evolved had stayed relevant, had refused to become obsolete. In 2005, when the Air Force Academy updates its gunnery training curriculum, they name one module the Mercer Principle. It's taught to every pilot, every weapons systems officer, every person involved in aerial combat. The principle is simple. When the system fails, when the equipment doesn't work, when doctrine has become a liability, that's when individual thought, mathematical precision, and the willingness to break rules in service of truth becomes essential. The module includes the fog engagement. Students analyze it as a case study. They study the mathematics. They calculate the firing solution themselves, working through Mercer's logic step by step. They learn not just what he did, but how he thought, how he'd taken an impossible problem and broken it down into solvable components. What they don't learn, what almost nobody learns, is the cost. The years of mockery, the threat of court-martial, the institutional resistance. The fact that Mercer had spent the better part of 1944 defending a method that everyone told him was wrong. The lesson that gets forgotten is the loneliest one, that sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone, to trust your calculations when everyone else trusts doctrine, to believe that precision matters more than consensus, to accept that you might be wrong, but that accepting a broken system is worse than the risk of being wrong. There is a kind of heroism that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't charge forward. It doesn't make speeches. It stands in the cold with a marked barrel and asks a simple question. What if this could work better? Thomas Mercer didn't change the war by himself. No one person does. The outcomes were decided by millions of men and women across dozens of theaters over 6 years of grinding conflict. Mercer was one voice among millions, one mind among countless others, all trying to solve problems, all trying to survive, all refusing to accept that the odds were fixed. But he changed the margin. And margins are everything. A 2% improvement in gunnery accuracy translates to dozens of bomber aircraft surviving that wouldn't have otherwise. Dozens of bombers means hundreds of men coming home. Hundreds of men means thousands of missions that succeed instead of fail. Thousands of missions means the war ends faster, ends with fewer losses, ends with systems that work instead of systems that merely fail gracefully. He understood something fundamental that the Air Force eventually learned, but not without cost. Tools are not neutral. They embody assumptions. They reflect the knowledge and limitations of the people who designed them. And when the assumptions are wrong, when the limitations are fatal, someone has to step outside the manual and ask whether the tool serves the mission or the mission serves the tool. The K-13 gun sight served bureaucracy. The K-14 served the future. But Mercer's marked barrel served the men in the turrets. That was the difference. That was why it mattered. The fog engagement in November 1944 became legend not because it was technically sophisticated. It wasn't. It became legend because it represented a moment when one man's refusal to accept a broken system resulted in an enemy fighter being downed at impossible range through zero visibility. It represented the triumph of mathematics over magic, of precision over hope, of individual judgment over institutional inertia. By the end of the war, 25,000 American bombers had been lost to enemy action. More than 250,000 airmen were dead or captured. The losses were catastrophic. Would Mercer's method have saved all of them? No. Could it have reduced losses by even 2%, 3%, 5%? Almost certainly. That translates to thousands of lives. Thousands of families who didn't receive telegrams. Thousands of men who came home. The sergeant from Dayton bent a piece of metal 2 degrees. The pilot from South Africa refused to turn when everyone else climbed. And the telephone lineman from Oregon calculated a firing solution in the fog. 3 men. 3 innovations born from desperation and stubbornness. 3 refusals to accept that the tools or the tactics or the systems were good enough. And the war changed. Not because of them alone, but because of the ripple effect. Because they proved that change was possible. Because they showed others that doctrine could be questioned, that authority wasn't the same as correctness, that sometimes the person closest to the problem saw the solution first. In the decades since, military trainers have used Mercer's story as a teaching case. Not for gunnery, for problem solving, for the idea that systems can be broken in ways that aren't immediately obvious, that sometimes you have to trust your mathematics more than you trust the manual, that the courage to act on incomplete information, to modify and test and risk failure, That's as vital as the courage to face enemy fire. There are no monuments to Thomas Mercer. There's no museum wing. There's no statue. There's just a folder in an archive somewhere containing a technical manual written in precise handwriting. There's a gun camera film from November 12, 1944, showing a Messerschmitt 109 emerging from fog and immediately beginning to disintegrate. There's a notation in declassified Air Force records crediting one staff sergeant with contributions to fire control doctrine. And there's a principle that echoes forward through every generation of military training. Precision matters. Mathematics works. And one person working alone in the dark can shift the odds just enough to save lives they'll never meet. The fog has long since cleared. The bombers are gone. The fighters are scrap. The men are mostly dead now, claimed by age and time, and the simple entropy of a life lived after war. But the principle survives. The mathematics survives. The idea that systems can be better than they are survives. And somewhere, in the way we calculate trajectories, in the way we train gunners, in the way we approach problems that seem impossible, Thomas Mercer is still there. Still calculating. Still refusing to accept that close enough is good enough. Still firing into the fog. And still hitting something that was traveling faster than the speed of sound. Some legacies are carved in stone. Others are written in the physics of survival. This one is both. And it matters. It always mattered. It always will. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.